My husband told me not to come back to his parents' estate outside Boston for Christmas this year. He said his ex-wife would be there, and his parents wanted to give his daughter a complete family holiday experience. He claimed my presence would only ruin their perfect family aesthetic. So, I spent Christmas Eve my own way. But just after midnight, my phone rang. Porch. My husband's voice was shaking, screaming hysterically, asking why I was doing this to him. He had no idea I was about to take everything in his name. I'm Blair, 33 years old. Until last Christmas, my husband thought I was just a low-level freelance bookkeeper. On Christmas Eve, the snow outside Boston was heavy, swirling and beating against our bedroom windows. Porch. Trevor was zipping up his designer leather travel bag. At 36, Trevor was the CEO of a flashy tech startup. This man built his entire personality around expensive custom suits, high-end social mixers, and the image of endless wealth. I stood at the master bedroom doorway, watching him stuff his cashmere sweaters into the bag with an anxious energy. Porch. I think it's best if you stay here tonight, he said, not even looking at me. Monica is taking Lily to my parents' estate for Christmas Eve dinner. My parents want to take a family photo under the tree tomorrow morning, and they want Lily to feel like she has a whole, unbroken family this holiday. Porch. I walked over to the bed and picked up a slightly wrinkled shirt he had carelessly tossed onto the mattress. I smoothed the fabric and folded it with deliberate, calm precision. A complete family, I repeated, my voice completely flat. I guess my presence as your legal wife would only ruin the aesthetic of that complete family, right? Porch. Trevor let out a heavy sigh, the kind of exaggerated sigh a teacher gives a slow student. Honestly, Blair, yes, you always look out of place at those events. You aren't good at socializing with their friends, you just sit there and make everyone uncomfortable. It's better for everyone if you stay home and enjoy a quiet night. I placed the neatly folded shirt into his bag. Porch. I suppose it is better for everyone, I replied. Just like last month when I supposedly ruined your father's retirement dinner, so your mother had me sit at the overflow table by the kitchen door. I was placed with the catering staff, while Monica sat at the main table right next to you. Trevor rolled his eyes and forced the travel bag zipper shut. You're being ridiculous again. Porch. My parents were hosting top-tier venture capitalists that night. Monica knows how to work a room. She knows how to mingle. And you? You just file tax returns for local laundromats and small businesses. You're just a paper-pushing clerk, Blair. You don't understand how high-end networking works. And you can't blame my parents for wanting to put their best foot forward in front of VIPs. Porch. He grabbed his coat and checked his reflection in the mirror, ensuring his hair was still combed perfectly. I stood there quietly, taking his insults without shedding a single tear. For 3 whole years, I had listened to him mock my work-from-home accounting business. Porch. For 3 whole years, I let him and his elitist parents treat me like an uncultured maid, an outsider they generously allowed into their inner circle. They thought I was a fragile, boring woman who hit the jackpot by marrying a Silicon Valley genius. They didn't know that my home office was actually the global headquarters of a private equity fund I built from scratch. Porch. I didn't file tax returns for laundromats. I acquired distressed assets, restructured failing businesses, and legally liquidated bad debts. And for the past 8 months, I had been quietly buying up every single piece of corporate debt belonging to Trevor's failing company. A sharp, obnoxious car horn echoed from the driveway, breaking the bedroom silence. Porch. I walked to the window and looked down through the falling snow. A brand-new cherry-red Porsche Macan was idling in our driveway. Monica sat in the driver's seat wearing a fur coat, impatiently tapping the steering wheel. Trevor grabbed his bag and walked toward the stairs. Monica is giving me a ride to the estate, he called out without looking back. See you on the 26th. Don't wait up. Porch. I followed him downstairs and stood at the door, watching him hurry into the freezing wind. Monica rolled down the Porsche window. Her gaze moved past Trevor, locking eyes with me on the porch, before she flashed a bright, condescending smirk. "Thanks for watching the house for us, Blair," she shouted over the roar of the luxury engine. Porch. "Trevor told me your cooking is usually a disaster, so I already ordered fresh Maine lobster for the family tonight. Enjoy your microwave dinner." Trevor walked to the car, threw his bag into the back seat, and leaned into the driver's window. Right there in my driveway, he kissed his ex-wife on the lips. It wasn't a friendly peck, it was a lingering, possessive kiss. He stood up, gave me one last, dismissive look, and got into the passenger seat. The Porsche sped down the snowy street, leaving 2 deep tracks in the fresh powder. I stood on the porch for 10 seconds, letting the bitter wind cut across my face. I didn't scream or break down. I just turned around, walked inside, and locked the heavy front door. I went straight through the kitchen and down the hallway to my small, unassuming home office. Sitting at my desk, I scanned my thumb on the secure laptop's biometric reader and typed in a complex 40-character password. The screen lit up, bypassing the dummy accounting software on my desktop and going straight to my high-security corporate dashboard. Charts, legal documents, and financial metrics flashed across the screen. Right in the center, the progress bar for the hostile takeover of Trevor's tech startup read, 100% complete. The grace period for his loan officially ended at 5 p.m. today. Legally speaking, he was completely wiped out. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct line to my chief corporate counsel. It answered on the first ring. "Klein," I said, my voice steady and cold. "The grace period is over. Initiate asset recovery under UCC Article 9 immediately. Freeze the corporate accounts, lock down his personally guaranteed assets, and execute the foreclosure on that estate. I want everything frozen solid before they even serve the appetizers." "Right away, boss," Klein replied. I hung up, leaned back in my ergonomic office chair, and watched the snowfall outside. Trevor wanted a complete family Christmas without his clerk wife. He was about to get his wish, along with a harsh lesson in high-end networking. The silence of the house wrapped around me, heavy and absolute, broken only by the steady hum of my server rack hidden inside the custom mahogany cabinets. I poured myself a glass of Cabernet, the deep red liquid reflecting the glow of 4 curved monitors. Then my phone buzzed on the smooth wooden desk. The screen lit up with a notification from the Wilson family group chat. I opened it. My mother-in-law, Patricia, had uploaded a high-resolution photo. It was Trevor and Monica standing in front of the massive stone fireplace at the Wilson estate. They held crystal champagne flutes, smiling brightly, shoulders pressed tight, a picture-perfect image of family bliss. Below the photo, Patricia added a caption and tagged me directly. "So glad we can have a peaceful, high-class Christmas this year without any awkward tension. Trevor works so hard and deserves to be surrounded by people truly in his class." I read the text twice. Once upon a time, maybe 2 years ago, a message like that would have sent me crying on the bathroom floor. I would have drafted dozens of frantic responses, trying to defend myself, pointing out her cruelty, or begging Trevor to speak up for me. But tonight, I felt nothing. No, that's a lie. I felt a deep, clinically rational satisfaction. I flipped the phone face down on the desk. I didn't type a reply. I had a much louder response in mind. My hands moved to the keyboard, fingers flying over the mechanical keys, with the muscle memory of a predator that had waited silently in the dark for 3 years. I opened the master ledger for Apex Capital. When Trevor first met me, I was a mid-level financial analyst. When we married, he convinced me to leave my corporate job, claiming his startup was about to go public, and he needed a wife to manage the household, not someone exhausted by 80-hour work weeks. I compromised. I started taking private clients from home. Trevor scoffed at it. He told his tech investor friends that I was just a glorified bookkeeper, balancing ledgers for mom-and-pop shops and laundromats. He loved that narrative. It made him the undisputed king of the castle, the visionary CEO, while I was just the household accountant managing the grocery budget. He never bothered to look at my monitors. If he had, he would have realized my clients weren't laundromats. They were offshore hedge funds, activist venture capitalists, and silent partners looking for opportunities to liquidate bloated, poorly managed tech startups. Startups exactly like his. While Trevor spent $500,000 a year leasing supercars, ordering custom suits, and taking Monica out to private dinners to maintain the image of unstoppable success, I was actively consolidating capital. I used nominee directors and a network of shell companies to anonymously found Apex Capital. Over the past 8 months, Apex Capital had been buying up every single piece of Trevor's defaulted corporate debt from panicked initial investors. I pulled up the specific bridge loan agreement Trevor signed 90 days ago on my center monitor. He had been backed into a corner. His initial investors pulled out, his payroll bounced, and he needed a $10 million cash injection just to keep the doors open at his flashy downtown office. Apex Capital threw him that lifeline. He was so arrogant, so certain of his own untouchable genius, that he completely ignored his internal legal team's advice. He willingly signed a personal guarantee, putting up his company shares, his bank accounts, and his personal property as collateral for the loan. Now, I clicked into the secure banking portal, integrated with our legal department. The grace period for his first massive interest payment had expired at exactly 5 p.m. tonight. I initiated the default proceedings. With a few quick keystrokes, I triggered the provisions of UCC Article 9. I wasn't just collecting a debt. I was legally executing a total asset freeze. I locked his corporate payroll accounts. I froze his primary checking and savings accounts. I flagged his personal black card, his corporate lines of credit, and the secret offshore accounts he thought I knew nothing about. The phone buzzed on the desk again. Another text in the family group chat, this time from Richard, my father-in-law. "Well," said Patricia, "it's wonderful to see this house full of life and success." I glanced at the message, took a sip of wine, and turned back to my screens. Richard was right about one thing. Success really is beautiful. I opened another secondary window to monitor the automated wire reversal network. I watched the numbers in Trevor's available balance drain away, rerouting back into the holding accounts of Apex Capital. The figures dropped in real time. Millions of dollars in leveraged funds shifted directly from his hands into mine. This is the cold reality of private equity. It isn't fought by yelling in a driveway or sending passive-aggressive group texts. It's fought in absolute silence, with ironclad contracts, financial covenants, and bulletproof legal precision. Trevor thought he could discard me for the holidays because I didn't fit his aesthetic of wealth. He didn't understand that I was the only reason he could still pretend to be rich. I pulled up the final command terminal. The screen showed the progress bar for the global asset freeze. The automated system was currently signaling his respective financial institutions, filing legal injunctions and cutting off every line of credit tied to Trevor's social security number. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 80%, 90%, 99%. I held my breath. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway. Then the screen flashed a bright, solid green. 100% complete. All assets frozen. Recovery protocols active. I leaned back in my chair and glanced at the current time in the bottom corner of the monitor. It was 11:45 p.m. Trevor and Monica were likely enjoying that lavish lobster dinner. At this very moment, they had no idea the financial ground beneath their feet had completely vanished. The trap was fully set. Now, all I had to do was wait for the restaurant bill to arrive at their table. Just 5 minutes after midnight, my phone rang, shattering the quiet of the home office. The caller ID flashed Trevor's name. I let it ring 3 times, taking a slow sip of the Cabernet, savoring the deep, rich flavor. When I finally slid the screen to answer, I didn't say hello. I just listened. "What on earth did you do?" Trevor screamed into the receiver. His voice was sharp and frantic, completely stripped of his usual smooth, arrogant facade. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany desk. Porch. I'm sitting in my office, Trevor. What do you think I'd be doing at midnight on Christmas Eve? Don't play games with me, Blair, he hissed. In the background, I could clearly hear the distinct acoustic signature of a high-end restaurant, the clinking of fine crystal, the low murmur of wealthy patrons, and the sharp, displeased voice of a maitre d' demanding a resolution. Porch. I am standing at the front desk of Astra right now. The bill is $4,000. I gave them my personal platinum card, declined. I gave them my corporate black card, declined. I gave them 2 backup credit cards, and the machine straight up rejected them for suspected fraud. The manager is threatening to call the Boston Police Department. Porch. I tapped the bottom of my wine glass with my fingernail. Sounds stressful, Trevor. Maybe Monica can settle the bill with that generous alimony you pay her. I heard Monica complaining in the background, demanding to know why they were standing by the coat check like common criminals. Trevor shushed her frantically before bringing the phone back to his mouth. Porch. Listen to me, you bitter, jealous bookkeeper, he spat, his voice dropping to a toxic whisper. I know you did this. You're throwing a tantrum because I chose to spend Christmas with my real family instead of sitting in that depressing house with you. You used your cute little accounting tricks to lock me out of our joint checking account. Now, unfreeze it right now. Porch. Wire the money to the restaurant, or I swear to God, I will make you pay. The sheer sense of entitlement was breathtaking. He had just spent $4,000 ordering oysters and champagne for his ex-wife and his parents while explicitly banning me from the table, and he still expected me to save him. Porch. I'm afraid you're overestimating my accounting tricks, I replied, my voice dropping into a cold, calm register. I didn't hack your accounts, Trevor. I just initiated a standard withdrawal. As a joint account holder, I am legally permitted to withdraw the exact principal amount I personally deposited over the last 3 years. As for your personal deposits, I didn't touch a single penny. Porch. What personal deposits? He yelled, panic finally breaking through his anger. I haven't deposited a paycheck into that account in 8 months. You drained everything. Looking at the glowing monitor illuminating my face, I smiled. That sounds like poor management of your personal finances. I can't be held responsible for your lack of liquidity. Porch. What about my corporate cards? He demanded, his breathing growing heavy. I have millions of dollars in venture backing in my commercial accounts. You can't touch those. You're just a freelancer. You have zero authorization over my corporate ledgers. I'm calling my bank first thing tomorrow morning to have you arrested for cyber fraud. Porch. I took another sip of wine, looking at the digital dashboard, confirming his corporate accounts were tightly frozen under federal banking regulations. I strongly advise against calling the police, Trevor. I didn't touch your corporate credit cards. I suggest you think back to that bridge loan you signed 90 days ago. Porch. You know, the $10 million cash injection you took from Apex Capital to keep your startup from drowning. A heavy, dead silence fell over the line. The background noise of the restaurant seemed to vanish. What does Apex Capital have to do with this? He asked, his voice suddenly hollow. Porch. You missed the first major interest payment, due at 5 p.m. tonight, I explained, stating the facts with brutal, clinical business precision. When a company defaults on a high-yield distressed loan, the creditors execute an immediate financial freeze. They lock corporate accounts to prevent a defaulting CEO from, say, spending money on $4,000 luxury dinners instead of making payroll. Porch. Your creditors have finally caught up with you, Trevor. You are insolvent. You have no idea what you're talking about, he stammered, though the terror in his voice betrayed him. You're just a paper-pushing clerk. You don't understand high finance. Apex Capital is a massive private equity firm. They don't freeze accounts on a holiday weekend. I have a grace period. I have lawyers. Porch. Your grace period expired, I stated flatly. And your lawyers will tell you exactly what I'm telling you now. You are completely out of money. In the background, the maitre d'haute's voice cut back into the audio. Sir, I need a valid form of payment right now, or I am calling law enforcement. Trevor cursed loudly. He was cornered. His parents were watching. Monica was humiliated. His perfectly crafted image of a wealthy man was unraveling in the middle of a crowded restaurant. He lashed out, retreating to the only strategy he had left: pure, unadulterated aggression. You think this is funny? He roared into the phone. You think you can humiliate me in front of my family and get away with it? I am done with you, Blair. I am walking into that house tomorrow morning with divorce papers. I'm hiring the most vicious litigation lawyer in Massachusetts. I will drag you through the courts until you beg for mercy. I'm taking half the house. I'm taking your pathetic little freelance business. And I will leave you on the street with nothing. You will regret the day you ever crossed me. I didn't interrupt him once during his entire tirade. I let him expend the last of his energy, knowing he was fighting a war he had already lost. Bring the papers, Trevor, I said softly. I'll leave the porch light on. I hung up the phone. I set the phone back down on the mahogany desk and looked at the green progress bar glowing on the monitor. He thought he was coming home tomorrow to take half my house. He had no idea I was taking his entire world. The heavy thud of the dossier hitting the mahogany coffee table echoed through the vast, empty living room like a gunshot. For a moment, nobody moved. The roaring fire behind Trevor cast long, dancing shadows across his pale face, illuminating the sudden fear in his eyes. Patricia stared at the red-stamped folder as if it were an explosive device, her manicured hand hovering near her pearl necklace. Richard, who had been sipping his morning coffee in the wingback chair, leaned forward with a frown. As an old-school business tycoon, he was a man who respected paper and ink. He reached for the dossier, but Trevor practically lunged across the Persian to snatch it away. Don't touch that, Dad, Trevor snapped, his voice tight and breathless. It's garbage. She's clearly having a mental breakdown because I stayed here last night. I kept my hands loosely folded in front of me, my posture perfect and relaxed. It's not garbage, Trevor. It's a certified copy of a federal filing. As of 8 a.m. this morning, your tech startup has officially been forced into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Patricia gasped, shooting a terrified look at Monica. Monica was standing near the heavily decorated, towering Christmas tree, clutching a cup of tea. She let out a loud, condescending scoff and rolled her eyes, though her knuckles turned white against the porcelain cup. Trevor threw his head back and let out a sharp, dramatic bark of a laugh. It was loud but completely hollow. He looked at his father, shaking his head with an exaggerated expression of pity. Do you see what I have to deal with? She's delusional. She does taxes for laundromats. Dad, she's making things up. She uses basic accounting software and thinks she understands high finance. Now she's jealous because I brought Monica back, so she's faking federal documents. Richard looked at me, his bushy eyebrows knitted tight in a deep scowl. Blair, what is the meaning of this? You can't just storm into our home on Christmas morning, making ridiculous, unfounded accusations about your husband's company. Trevor's startup is valued at $50 million. It was valued at $50 million 2 years ago, I corrected smoothly, maintaining a pleasant conversational tone. That was before the initial burn rate exceeded projected revenues by 400%. That was before Trevor used Series B funding to lease its corporate fleet of vehicles and rent an unnecessary luxury penthouse office just to show off to his golfing buddies. Shut up, Trevor roared, taking an aggressive step toward me. I'm warning you, Blair. Get out of my parents' house right now. I didn't move an inch. I locked my eyes on Richard, the only person in the room who actually knew how to read a balance sheet. His company has been fundamentally insolvent for 12 full months. Last January, his primary investors realized the product was a failure and threatened to pull out. To keep them quiet, Trevor took out a high-yield, short-term bridge loan. He desperately needed the cash to maintain the illusion of success. "She's making it up," Trevor shouted, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "Don't listen to her. She's just a clerk who stamps papers." "The principal loan amount was $10 million, I continued, my voice cutting through his shouting with surgical precision. The interest rate was predatory, compounding at 18% monthly. But Trevor was desperate, so he signed a personal guarantee. He put up his company shares, this entire estate, and all his personal assets as collateral. Richard slowly stood up. He looked at Trevor, and for the first time, a flicker of real doubt appeared on the old man's face. "Trevor, what is she talking about?" "What personal guarantee?" Trevor was sweating now. Despite the bitter Boston winter outside, fine beads of sweat lined his forehead and upper lip. "It's nothing, Dad. It's completely fabricated. She hacked my bank accounts last night, and now she's spinning this wild story to cover her tracks. She's just trying to ruin Christmas." I took a step forward, closing the physical distance between us, radiating absolute authority. "I didn't need to hack your accounts, Trevor. I own the debt. I am the CEO of Apex Capital, and as of 5 p.m. yesterday, you missed the final grace period payment of $1,822,416.12. The exact figure, down to the penny, hit the room like a physical blow. "The total outstanding liability for your company," I said slowly, ensuring every syllable resonated, "is currently $14,386,912.40. You have $42.16 left in your operational checking account. Your payroll bounced 3 days ago, meaning your employees will wake up the day after Christmas to empty bank accounts. And that cherry-red Porsche parked in the driveway? The leasing company initiated recovery protocols at dawn." Trevor opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in his expensive cashmere sweater. He looked frantically at Monica, then at his mother, but he had run out of lies to tell. "You use this estate as collateral?" Richard's voice dropped dangerously low, a deep rumble of pure fury. He ignored me entirely, his eyes dead set on his son. "Trevor, you leveraged my house for a bridge loan?" "Dad, I can fix it," Trevor stammered, his arrogant facade finally turning to ash. His voice became small, pleading. "I just need a little more time. The new software patch is almost ready. If I can just secure one more round of seed funding, I can buy back the debt. I swear I can fix it." I smiled, a slow, predatory expression that felt incredibly chilling in the cold tension of the room. "You can't fix it, Trevor. You can't buy back the debt because I refuse to sell it to you. I am your sole creditor, and I am calling the loan." Monica stumbled back a step, bumping into the massive Christmas tree. An expensive glass ornament fell and shattered on the hardwood floor, but no one looked down. Her eyes darted between Trevor and me, as if watching a horrific car crash unfold in slow motion. Patricia collapsed onto the velvet sofa, her hand over her chest, her breathing quick and shallow. I turned back to the mahogany coffee table and tapped the thick legal dossier with my index finger. Inside this folder is the official notice of asset recovery. It outlines all the legal steps being taken to liquidate your company's assets, freeze your personal accounts, and officially transfer the deed to this property. I suggest you review it closely, Richard. Your son just handed me the keys to your retirement. The roaring fire continued to crackle in the hearth, throwing warm light over the lavish decorations and the mountain of wrapped gifts. But a shocking, suffocating silence fell over the room. No one screamed, no one moved. The reality of the numbers, the precise, inescapable mathematics of their ruin, finally paralyzed them all. The silence was tight and fragile, lasting until a sharp, rhythmic clicking of designer heels shattered it. Monica stepped forward, her posture rigid, her chin tilted upward, wearing a combative mask of defense. She moved to Trevor's side and slid her arm through his, displaying a territorial stance. "This is honestly pathetic, Blair," Monica snapped, her voice echoing through the open space. Orch. Even for a desperate, bitter ex-wife, this is way too much drama. Trevor ignored her. He was staring at the thick red legal dossier on the coffee table, his eyes wide and unblinking. His hands hovered over the pages, trembling so hard he couldn't bring himself to flip them open. Monica detached her arm and stepped between us, acting as his personal shield. Orch. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest. Do you seriously expect any of us to believe this ridiculous performance? You? The CEO of a private equity firm? She let out a sharp, condescending laugh that bounced off the high stone walls. You sit in your home office all day in sweatpants, filing tax returns for nail salons and local bakeries. I know exactly what you did. Orch. You snooped through Trevor's briefcase, saw the name Apex Capital on his desk, and forged some fake documents to ruin his family Christmas because you're jealous. Patricia, still gripping her chest on the velvet sofa, nodded vigorously. She's right, Richard. This is a sick, twisted prank. Call the police. Call our legal team. Orch. Get her out of the estate this instant before she damages Trevor's reputation any further. Richard didn't reach for his phone, nor did he call for the estate's security staff. As a man who had built his own wealth in commercial real estate decades ago, Richard understood the devastating weight of undeniable leverage. Orch. He kept his eyes locked on his son, reading the sheer, unadulterated terror radiating from Trevor's stiff posture. Richard knew, with the cold certainty of a veteran executive, that I wasn't bluffing. You don't even understand how high-level corporate finance works, Monica continued, her voice growing sharper as she tried to regain control of the narrative. Trevor is a visionary. Orch. He's a Silicon Valley prodigy. He doesn't fail. He just secured a $10 million bridge loan from Apex Capital. That is a real company, a cold, respected Wall Street firm. They thoroughly vetted his finances. They back his genius plan. They are taking his startup public in Q3. I watched her perform. I let the insults wash over me, feeling nothing but clinical, detached amusement. Orch. For 3 years, I had worn a disguise, playing the quiet, unassuming wife. I dressed down, smiled politely at their suffocating dinners, and let them build their towering egos on the foundation of my supposed mediocrity. It was the perfect cover. Orch. While they were obsessed with appearances and upward social climbing, I spent thousands of hours analyzing market trends, locating regulatory loopholes, and building a financial war machine designed to dismantle weak, over-leveraged companies just like Trevor's. They would never hand $10 million to a sinking company, Monica insisted, turning to Richard and Patricia to rally her audience. Orch. Trevor always wins. He built this platform from scratch. He networks with the global elite. He plays golf with venture capitalists who manage billions. He bought me a brand new Porsche with his signing bonus. And you are just a glorified secretary, balancing ledgers for dry cleaners. You're trying to scare his parents because you know Trevor is leaving you with nothing tomorrow morning. Orch, you're desperately trying to force your way into a world where you don't belong. Trevor finally managed to grab the edge of the dossier. His knuckles were white from the strain. He flipped open the heavy red-stamped cardstock cover. I watched his eyes scan the first page. He saw the official corporate seal, the watermark of the U.S. Orch. District Court for the Southern District of New York, and his own precise, undeniable digital signature executed through the secure portal 90 days ago. He turned to the second page, his eyes darting frantically over the asset forfeiture clauses. He was reading the exact legal mechanisms, transferring ownership of the very house we stood in directly to my holding company. Orch. Monica, Trevor whispered. His voice was completely hollow, stripped of every ounce of arrogance. It sounded like a death rattle. No, Trevor, don't let her intimidate you, Monica snapped, spinning around to face him. She's a jealous bookkeeper. She's trying to humiliate you in front of your parents because she knows she doesn't belong in this family. Tell them, Orch. Tell your father your company is fine. Tell them Apex Capital is backing you. Trevor slowly lifted his head from the documents. He looked at his father, then his mother, and finally at Monica. He looked like a man standing on the gallows. The signatures, he choked out, his chest heaving as he struggled for air. The corporate seals, the asset schedule, they're real. Arch. Of course they look real. She forged them, Monica screamed, her upper-class mask of elegance burning away entirely. She marched right to the edge of the coffee table, slamming a hand down onto the polished wood. You're going to federal prison for this, Blair. You can't just invent a fantasy where you control a massive private equity firm just to punish your husband for outgrowing you. Arch. I remained absolutely still. Real power doesn't need to shout. Real power is absolute silence in the face of chaos. I stepped around the mahogany coffee table, taking slow, deliberate paces, closing the physical distance until I stood mere inches from Monica. The scent of her expensive floral perfume was stifling, but beneath it, I could smell the sharp, unmistakable metallic tang of rising panic. Orch. You seem to know an awful lot about corporate finance, Monica, I said, my voice dropping to a low, calm register that seemed to drop the temperature of the room instantly. Monica opened her mouth to snap back, but the absolute stillness in my gaze paralyzed her vocal cords. Orch. I looked directly into her eyes, stripping away every layer of her artificial superiority until nothing was left but the raw, undeniable truth. You speak so highly of this cold, respected firm that backed your ex-husband's genius plan. Tell me, Monica, did you ever bother to look up who actually owns Apex Capital? Monica's perfectly painted lips parted slightly, her jaw slackening. Orch. The sharp, combative edge of her arrogance instantly blunted into pure, unadulterated confusion. She blinked rapidly, searching for an answer she simply didn't possess. What are you talking about? She demanded, her voice losing its previous volume. Apex Capital is a major firm. It's run by a board. It's run by powerful people. Her voice trailed off, her gaze darting to Trevor for support. Orch. She had no idea who ran the company. She had just been parroting Trevor's important-sounding boasts. I looked past her, ignoring her existence entirely as if she were a piece of misplaced furniture. I locked my eyes solely on my husband. Apex Capital is a privately held corporation, I stated clearly. I registered it in Delaware 5 years ago. Orch. I am the founder, the managing partner, and the sole majority shareholder. Every single dollar of debt you sold to keep your sinking ship afloat was purchased by me. Trevor shook his head frantically. The blood rushed back into his cheeks, dyeing his face a mottled, frantic red. That's a lie, he shouted, his voice cracking under the strain. That is a sick, schizophrenic lie. Orch. Apex Capital is a billion-dollar entity. You sit at home in sweatpants doing data entry. You don't even know how a bridge loan operates. You're insane. Dad, call the police right now. She's out of her mind. A low, calm voice cut through Trevor's escalating hysteria. Actually, Trevor, she's telling the absolute truth. Orch. Everyone froze, turning their heads toward the dim alcove near the grand staircase. DeAndre stepped into the light of the living room. Orch. As Trevor's chief financial officer and supposed right-hand man, DeAndre had arrived at the estate before dawn for what Trevor had billed as a critical holiday strategy session. He held a ceramic mug, taking a slow, measured sip of his coffee before placing it gently on a polished side table. DeAndre walked to the center of the room, adjusting his glasses. He didn't look at me. Orch. He looked directly at Trevor, wearing an expression of profound exhaustion mixed with deep distaste. I reviewed the SEC filings last night when your corporate credit card declined at the bar, DeAndre said, his voice carrying the heavy weight of someone who had watched a disaster happen in slow motion. I pulled up the public disclosure forms for Apex Capital. She is the majority shareholder. Orch. I told you not to sign term sheets you didn't understand. Trevor stumbled backward, his knees hitting the edge of the velvet sofa. You knew, he screamed, his voice rising an octave. You're my CFO. You were supposed to protect the company. You just let my own wife engineer a hostile takeover right under our noses? Orch. 2 years ago, You transferred the deed of this house to the family trust to avoid estate taxes, I said, leaning in with relentless precision. And you made Trevor the primary trustee, giving him full legal authority to leverage trust assets for commercial ventures. You handed the keys to the kingdom to a desperate fraud, all because you blindly bought into his illusion of success. Orch. Don't blame your massive ego on me, Trevor. DeAndre snapped back, closing the distance between them. I did my job. I told you your burn rate was unsustainable. I warned you against renting that penthouse. I told you to stop using company funds to host million-dollar networking retreats in Aspen just to kiss up to venture capitalists who had no intention of investing. But you wouldn't listen. You went around me. You signed that personal guarantee behind my back because you thought you were the smartest guy in the room. You brought this on yourself. Patricia let out a shaky sob, burying her face in her hands. Richard stood rigid, his face a cold, unreadable mask of fury. He was a man who respected power, and right now he was watching his own son get dismantled by his own disastrous hubris. I turned my focus back to Trevor. He was gripping the armrest of the sofa so tightly, his knuckles were white, looking like the floor beneath him was cracking wide open. You thought I was a boring, fragile clerk? I said, my voice smooth and devoid of any sympathy. You spent 3 years mocking my home business. All those late nights you thought I was balancing books for dry cleaners. I was analyzing your quarterly losses. Those boring tax seminars you refused to attend with me? I was meeting with the investors you alienated, quietly buying up their shares at rock-bottom prices. Monica suddenly took a sharp step away from Trevor, creating a very deliberate physical distance between them. Reality was hitting her in real time. She hadn't snagged a brilliant, wealthy tech mogul. She had tied herself to a broke, fraudulent shell of a man who was about to lose everything. She looked down at the cherry-red Porsche keys dangling from her fingers, finally realizing they belonged to a car that was actively being repossessed. Trevor looked up at me, his blue eyes bloodshot and wide with shock. The brutal reality was finally sinking in. The corporate shark that had systematically cut off his funding, bought his toxic debt, and cornered him with bulletproof contracts wasn't some anonymous Wall Street predator. It was the woman he had sidelined, insulted, and betrayed, his own wife. You did this on purpose, Trevor whispered, his voice trembling so hard he could barely articulate the words. You planned this whole thing. You set me up to fail. You handed me the rope yourself, Trevor, I replied, my expression completely neutral. I just tied the knot. You built your entire life on a projection of endless wealth while running a hollow company into the ground. You thought you could use people as stepping stones. You thought my presence ruined the aesthetic of your wealthy family. So, I removed myself from your aesthetic, and I took all your actual wealth with it. Richard finally spoke, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that demanded absolute attention. He turned away from Trevor and looked at me. His eyes were cold and calculating, completely stripped of the condescension he had shown me for years. So what happens now, Blair? He asked. You hold the deed to this house. You hold my son's corporate assets. What is your next move? I pulled the thick red dossier from the coffee table and held it out to him. I highly recommend you hire independent counsel, Richard. Because while Trevor was busy destroying his company, he dragged your retirement funds right down with it. As of 9 a.m. this morning, the forensic audits have officially begun. Richard stared at the red-stamped dossier in his hands as if it were coated in poison. Forensic audits, he repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Trevor suddenly lunged forward a step, breaking the frozen scene. He roughly pushed past Monica and pointed a trembling finger straight at my face. You can't touch me personally, he spat, a desperate hint of his old arrogance returning to his voice. You can take the startup. Fine, go liquidate the servers, fire the staff, take the intellectual property. I don't care. I'm the CEO of an LLC, Blair. You might have bought the corporate debt, but my personal wealth is completely shielded. My bank accounts, my stock portfolio, my offshore accounts, they're untouchable. You get a dead tech company and I walk away clean. I let him finish his frantic little speech. He was practically vibrating with a desperate hope, clinging to a basic business concept he clearly misunderstood. Standing by the stairs, DeAndre let out a heavy sigh, rubbing his temples in utter disbelief at his boss's ignorance. You really should have attended those legal seminars I recommended last year, Trevor, I said smoothly, taking a step closer so he could see the absolute certainty in my eyes. The moment you signed Apex Capital's bridge loan agreement, your corporate veil was pierced. You didn't just leverage company assets. You were desperate. You needed quick cash to hide your incompetence from your investors. So, you signed a highly comprehensive personal guarantee. Trevor swallowed hard, his throat tight. That was just a standard security agreement. It only covers liquid corporate capital. Nothing in an Apex Capital contract is standard, I corrected him, cold and unyielding. I executed this recovery under UCC Article 9, which governs secured transactions. Trevor, by signing that specific term sheet, you legally granted Apex Capital a perfected security interest in every single asset you own. I began to pace slowly in front of the massive fireplace, controlling the rhythm of the room like a seasoned litigator. The personal guarantee you signed completely bypassed your LLC shield. It explicitly listed your personal property as collateral for the corporate debt. Your checking accounts, your savings, the offshore accounts you thought you hid so well, your investment portfolio, and yes, even your precious luxury cars. Under the UCC filing, they are all classified as collateral. As of 8:00 a.m. this morning, they have been legally seized to satisfy that $14 million outstanding debt. Trevor stumbled backward, his legs giving out until the back of his knees hit the heavy mahogany coffee table. He looked entirely defeated. You can't do that. That's illegal. You can't just take my money. It isn't your money anymore, my voice echoed against the high stone walls. It belongs to the creditor. It belongs to me. I filed the UCC-1 financing statements with the Secretary of State months ago. It is completely legal, a matter of public record, and absolutely permanent. Because you defaulted on the loan terms, the Uniform Commercial Code grants me the right to seize and liquidate your personal assets without a court order. You have nothing left. Patricia let out a strained cry, burying her face into her husband's shoulder. Richard didn't comfort her. He remained rigid, his jaw clenched tight, a muscle twitching in his cheek. As a veteran of the commercial real estate world, Richard knew exactly what a perfected security interest meant. He knew his son had just received a financial death sentence. You stupid, arrogant idiot, Richard growled, his voice shaking with absolute disgust. He completely ignored me, focusing entirely on his son. You leveraged your entire life and my estate because you were too proud to admit you failed. Dad, I didn't know, Trevor pleaded, his hands up, tears welling in his eyes. I thought it was just standard boilerplate paperwork. The broker said it was just a formality. That broker works for me, I interjected quietly. I instructed him to make the terms crystal clear. You signed your life away because you were too busy planning your next golf trip to bother reading the fine print. Monica stood frozen, her eyes darting between Trevor and me. The absolute truth of the situation was crashing down on her like an avalanche. The lavish lifestyle, the expensive gifts, the illusion of endless wealth she had clung to. It was all evaporating right in front of her. She looked at Trevor, her manicured hands clenched into tight fists. Wait a minute, Monica said suddenly, her voice sharp and grating. She took a step away from Trevor, glaring at him with intense fury. If what she's saying is true and she gave you a $10 million bridge loan months ago, where is that money? Trevor flinched, refusing to meet her gaze. He stared at the floor, his breathing shallow and rapid. It went into the company, Monica. Operating expenses. Payroll. Don't lie to me, Trevor. Monica screamed, her high society mask shattering completely. George. $10 million doesn't just vanish into operating expenses in a few months, especially if the company was already failing. Where is the money? Trevor opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked to his mother for support, but Patricia just wept silently, refusing to look at him. George. In the corner of the room, DeAndre let out a sharp, bitter chuckle, shaking the remains of the coffee in his mug. I reached into my sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a thin black ledger. I walked over to Monica and handed it to her. She hesitated for less than a second before snatching it from my hand. George. I tracked the disbursement of every single dollar, I said, keeping my tone detached and rational. I highly recommend you turn to page 4, Monica. It makes for very interesting reading. Monica flipped the ledger open, her eyes darting across the tightly printed columns of numbers and transaction descriptions. George. I watched the color drain completely from her face, her lipsticked mouth parting in absolute shock. She was finally reading exactly what her visionary, genius ex-husband had done with that $10 million lifeline. Monica's manicured nails dug deep into the heavy parchment pages. Her breath caught sharply, letting out a ragged gasp in the quiet living room. George. She followed the printed ink, her gaze moving wildly as the undeniable truth of Trevor's desperation stared back at her. $214,000 wired to a luxury auto dealership. Monica read aloud, her voice trembling, all her former arrogance completely gone. $3.8 million wired to an escrow account for Beacon Hill Premium Real Estate. And another $2 million funneled directly into a private trust via a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Trevor suddenly lunged forward, his face distorted with panic. "Give me that!" he shouted, reaching for the ledger. DeAndre was faster. The CFO slid smoothly between them, placing a firm hand on Trevor's chest and shoving him heavily back onto the velvet sofa. "Sit down, Trevor," DeAndre ordered, his voice cold and authoritative. "You've caused enough damage." I remained relaxed, my hands clasped in front of me, watching the grand illusion of Trevor's life crumble into dust. He didn't spend a single dime of that $10 million bridge loan on his company, Monica, I stated, my voice echoing off the high stone walls. There was no new software patch. There was no business expansion. Your visionary ex-husband committed textbook corporate fraud. He misappropriated federally registered loan funds to purchase that cherry red Porsche in the driveway. He bought you that luxury penthouse in the Back Bay. And he laundered the rest into a private trust, trying to buy the absolute loyalty of his quote-unquote perfect aesthetic family. Monica dropped the ledger onto the coffee table like it was a hot iron. "You bought my apartment with stolen corporate funds," she whispered, staring at Trevor with wide, horrified eyes. "You told me it was a personal signing bonus from a new venture firm. You told me you were making $50 million a year!" Trevor was hyperventilating, clawing at the collar of his cashmere sweater. "I did it for us, Monica," he pleaded, his voice cracking under the intense strain. "You said you needed security. You said you wouldn't let Lily come back to me unless I could provide the lifestyle you were accustomed to. I was going to pay it back. I just needed to close one more round of funding to balance the books. I did it to keep our family together." I let out a sharp, humorless chuckle. "You committed multiple federal felonies just to please a woman who barely tolerates you when your credit card clears," I corrected coldly. "But the real tragedy is your complete lack of foresight. Because you purchased these assets with a fraudulent bridge loan, they are fully subject to asset recovery under clawback provisions. That luxury penthouse? It now belongs to Apex Capital. The trust? Frozen. You didn't save your family, Trevor. You financially ruined them while destroying yourself." A sudden piercing shriek shattered the tight air. Patricia bolted up from the sofa. Her face was flushed a violent, angry red. She didn't look at the ledger or the federal bankruptcy papers. She stared directly at Trevor, her hands shaking with pure rage. You bought her a penthouse? Patricia screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Monica. You spent $4 million on your ex-wife? Trevor flinched, desperately avoiding his mother's gaze. Mom, please. I can explain what? Patricia demanded, her voice high and sharp with indignation. Last month, your father and I canceled our winter trip to St. George. Bart's because you came to us crying for a short-term personal loan to cover your supposed server upgrades. We liquidated part of our stock portfolio to hand you $250,000 in cash. You looked me in the eye and told me your company was on the verge of a breakthrough. And all the while, you were using family funds and fraudulent loans to buy real estate for a woman you already divorced? Richard took a step forward, his heavy leather boots thudding against the Persian rug. The patriarch of the family wasn't horrified by his son's wire fraud. He wasn't shocked that Trevor broke federal securities law or ruined the lives of his employees. Richard was entirely consumed by the absolute insult of where that money went. You leverage my estate, Richard growled, his voice low and dangerous, vibrating so deeply the crystal ornaments on the Christmas tree hummed. You put the house your grandfather built at risk, not to save your business, but to sponsor her vanity project? He pointed at Monica, his eyes full of absolute disgust.
你偷自己血亲的钱去买回一个在离婚协议里分走你一半资产的女人，你就是个可观的、意志薄弱的蠢货特雷弗。Dad, I had no choice, Trevor cried, tears spilling over as he pleaded. You always told me I needed to project success.
You taught me that image is everything. If I lost the company and I lost Monica, I was nothing. I was just trying to maintain the standard you set for me. Richard didn't offer a single ounce of sympathy. He turned his back on his weeping son and faced me. His posture was rigid, his jaw set in a cold, unforgiving line. He calculated the angles, assessed the damage, and immediately switched to the only mode he knew: aggressive, authoritarian control. He pointed a thick, heavy finger straight toward the front door. You've made your point, Blair. You walked in here, put on your dramatic performance, and embarrassed my son. I admit Trevor is a fool, but this ends now. I didn't move. I met his glare with absolute, unwavering calm. This doesn't end until the liquidation is complete, Richard. Richard stepped even closer, puffing out his chest, attempting to physically intimidate me. You are going to drop this ridiculous crusade. I don't care what tricks you used to get my idiot son to sign those papers. I keep the best corporate litigators in the state on retainer. I will bury you in endless injunctions. I will drag you through the appellate courts until you are completely bankrupt. I will personally bleed your little private equity firm dry of legal fees before I let you touch a single brick of this property. He pointed to the door again, his voice rising to a commanding roar. This is a private family matter. Get out of my house right now, or I'm calling the police to have you removed for trespassing. I didn't flinch. I didn't take a single step back. I stood rooted in the center of the antique Persian rug, letting the echo of his authoritative shout fade into a pathetic, empty silence. The steady tick-tock of the heavy grandfather clock in the corner emphasized the sudden dead quiet in the room. I looked at Richard's extended, trembling finger, then up at his flushed, angry face. He expected me to cower. He expected me to run. He was so used to using his wealth as an impenetrable shield that he couldn't comprehend a reality where his commands were entirely ignored. I reached into the thick red dossier, bypassing the financial ledgers and wire receipts. I pulled out a heavy, crisp document bound by brass staples. It bore the raised, embossed seal of the county clerk. I let it rest in my hands for a moment, feeling the physical weight of my leverage. Trespassing, I repeated the word, savoring it, letting it hang in the suffocating air of the massive living room. That's an interesting choice of words, Richard. It reminds me of the very first Thanksgiving I spent in this house. Do you remember that day? Richard glared at me, his chest heaving. Get out of my house, he roared, stepping forward to crowd my space. I stood my ground. porch. I remember it perfectly, I continued, my voice cutting through his anger with icy precision. I was 24. I wore a dress I had saved up for months to buy, desperate to make a good impression. I remember you stopping me right on the front steps. You looked me up and down like a stray animal that had wandered onto your perfectly manicured lawn. Porch. You told me to walk around to the back of the estate and use the servants' entrance. You told me my cheap, off-the-rack coat didn't match the aesthetic of the estate, and you didn't want arriving guests confusing me with the people who actually belonged here. Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, but I didn't even glance at her. My eyes were locked entirely on Richard. Porch. You made me walk through the freezing sleet to the kitchen door, past the caterers and delivery drivers, just to make sure I knew my place, I said, every syllable dripping with cold, refined fury. You wanted to make absolutely certain I knew I was beneath you. Porch. You wanted to establish that this grand historic estate was your kingdom, and I was just a peasant permitted to exist within its walls as long as I remained quiet and invisible. Richard sneered, his upper lip curling into a mask of pure elitist contempt. And you still don't belong here. My grandfather laid the foundation of this house. My father expanded it. I maintained it. Porch. You are nothing but an insignificant footnote in a long line of my son's failures. Now, for the last time, get out before I have you physically thrown onto the street. Dad, stop. Trevor suddenly let out a raspy, broken cry. Trevor was on the floor now, his knees completely giving out. He was staring at the watermark document in my hands, with a look of absolute, soul-crushing terror. Porch. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. Dad, please stop talking. Richard looked down at his son with disgust. Get off the floor, Trevor. Stop groveling. We are calling the lawyers and we will handle this. He can't handle it, Richard, I said, stepping past Trevor, closing the distance between Richard and myself. Porch. I held up the heavy legal document, letting the county seal catch the light of the crystal chandelier. You take such immense pride in this estate. Its heritage, its architecture, its prestige. It's a shame your son didn't share your deep reverence for family history. Richard froze. The confident, aggressive posture he had been projecting suddenly cracked. What are you talking about? Porch. When Trevor realized his company was bankrupt, he needed $14 million in cash to cover his fraud and buy Monica that penthouse. I explained in a conversational yet utterly lethal tone. He exhausted every conventional line of credit. The banks laughed at him. Private venture capitalists slammed doors in his face. Porch. To secure the bridge loan from Apex Capital, he needed massive, unencumbered collateral. Something bulletproof and asset-backed. I watched the realization hit Richard in slow motion. The color drained from his face, mirroring the pale, terrified expression of his son. Richard shook his head slowly, taking a staggered step back. No, he would never. Porch. He knows this house is completely off limits. This is our legacy. I slid the heavy, embossed document across the smooth mahogany coffee table. It came to a stop, perfectly aligned with Richard's trembling hands. I can't trespass in my own home, Richard, I said clearly, letting the finality of the statement ring through the room. Porch. Trevor used this entire estate as the primary collateral for his corporate loan. He signed over the deed through a cross-collateralization clause to secure the funds for Monica's apartment and his luxury vehicles. When he defaulted 90 days ago, that clause was legally triggered. You failed to pay, and I executed the foreclosure on this property. Porch. As of yesterday morning, the deed transfer was finalized, stamped, and recorded with the state. This estate belongs to me now. Following my declaration, a heavy, suffocating silence stretched the tension in the room to the breaking point. For 5 full seconds, nobody breathed. The grand, sweeping architecture of the ancestral estate seemed to press down on them. Porch. The soaring vaulted ceilings and crystal chandeliers suddenly felt less like symbols of their eternal supremacy, and more like the bars of a cage. Then, the vacuum imploded. Thief! Patricia screamed. the word ripping from her throat with the raw, grating edge of pure hysteria. She lunged forward, her hands clawing at the air, her perfectly styled hair falling wildly out of place. George, you are a thief. That document is a forgery. You cannot steal a family's legacy with a piece of paper. This is illegal. I'll have you arrested. I'll have you thrown into a cell where you belong. She hyperventilated, grabbing Richard's arm and shaking it violently. Tell her, Richard. Tell her she's insane. We own this house. We have always owned this house. Richard didn't comfort her. George. He shoved her hand away, his face twisting into a horrific purple mask of rage. The veins in his neck bulged against his stiff collar. He stepped toward me, his heavy fists clenching at his sides, projecting the same physical intimidation he had used to bully competitors and subordinates for 40 years. You think you're clever, Blair? He spat, every word vibrating with malice. George. You think finding a technical loophole gives you the right to stand in my living room and dictate terms? You are nothing. You are a minor inconvenience. I keep the best corporate litigators in the state on retainer. I will bury you in endless injunctions. I will drag you through the appellate courts until you are completely bankrupt. I will watch you get disbarred, disgraced, and ruined. George. You will leave this house with nothing but the clothes on your back. I didn't flinch. I didn't take a single step back. Instead, I slowly reached into the red dossier, pulled out a second document, and deliberately placed it on top of the foreclosure notice. George. You can't afford a single paralegal right now, Richard, I said, my voice dropping to a calm, icy register that cut through his shouting effortlessly. Let alone a fleet of high-priced litigators. Richard let out a sharp, barking laugh, though his eyes darted to the new paperwork on the table. Don't lecture me on my financial standing. George. My personal wealth is completely insulated from my idiot son's startup. Is it? I asked, tilting my head slightly. Because a $14 million bridge loan requires extremely strict underwriting. Apex Capital doesn't hand out that kind of capital without absolute guarantees. Trevor's fraudulent company valuation wasn't enough to secure the funds. George. The underwriters required a cosigner with verifiable hard assets. I tapped the top of the document with a manicured fingernail. George.
你表现得好像特雷弗是独自一人策划了这场金融灾难，但他没有。您在贷款上签了字，理查德，您的签名就在这里，紧挨着您儿子的签名。您心甘情愿地抵押了家族信托和这栋庄园来担保特雷弗的债务。Patricia stopped crying. The sudden,
unnatural stillness that came over her body was far more unsettling than her screams. She slowly turned her head to look at her husband as if looking at a stranger. Richard, she whispered, her voice trembling. What is she talking about? Why would you sign the house away for Trevor's company? The fury drained from Richard's face. He opened his mouth, but for the first time in his life, he had absolutely nothing to say. George, I'll tell you exactly why, Patricia. I cut into the silence seamlessly. He didn't do it out of some paternal devotion. He did it because he needed that cash injection even more desperately than Trevor did. You thought your husband was managing a flawless real estate empire. You thought his sudden business trips to Macau and Monaco were to acquire overseas developers. Richard lunged forward. George, shut your mouth! He roared, his voice cracking with sheer panic. I avoided him easily. It was gambling, Patricia. High stakes, unregulated baccarat tables. For the past 6 years, Richard has been quietly bleeding your family fortune dry. When he wasn't losing millions in foreign casinos, he was making increasingly reckless, unvetted real estate investments to try and win the money back. George, that massive commercial park in Chicago? It defaulted 3 months ago. He's facing margin calls from offshore lenders who don't send polite collection letters. I picked up the ledger, flipping to the final section, and read the numbers aloud with absolute, undeniable clarity. When Apex Capital's $14 million cleared, Trevor took his cut for the supercars and Monica's penthouse. George. But Richard took the lion's share. $700,000 wired instantly to clear casino markers in Macau. $2.4 million laundered through a shell LLC to appease the creditors in Chicago. You both treated this estate, this grand family legacy you value so much, like a personal piggy bank to fund your delusions of grandeur. Torch. You knew Trevor was faking his company metrics, Richard, but you signed as a co-guarantor anyway, because you were already drowning. Patricia stared at her husband. Her chest heaved as she fought to draw air into her lungs. The image of her powerful, untouchable husband had completely dissolved, leaving behind the pathetic reality of a desperate, indebted gambler. Richard! Patricia gasped, reaching out to clutch his lapels. Tell me she's lying. Tell me you didn't gamble our money away. Tell me you didn't let Trevor give our home away. Richard looked away. He couldn't meet her eyes. His broad shoulders slumped, his arrogant posture collapsing entirely inward. The silence was a total, absolute confession. Patricia released his coat as if she had been burned. She stumbled backward, her hands flying to her head. Her entire reality, decades of projected superiority and endless wealth, had been completely demolished in less than 10 minutes. Her son was a fraud facing federal embezzlement charges. Her husband was a broke gambler with a devastating secret. And the estate she had ruled over for half her life now belonged to the daughter-in-law she had ruthlessly mistreated. She turned wildly, her eyes darting around the room until they locked onto the one person who had remained silent and observant throughout the chaos. She rushed toward DeAndre, grabbing his forearm in a desperate claw-like grip. DeAndre, you know how to fix this, Patricia begged, tears streaming through her expensive makeup. You manage the accounts. You know tax law and corporate law. Please, you have to step in. Tell me there's a loophole. Tell us we can hide the rest of the money. Save us. Patricia clung to DeAndre as if he were the last piece of floating wreckage in a violent ocean. Her manicured nails dug deep into the sleeve of his tailored suit jacket, her knuckles turning white with the effort. The matriarch of the family, a woman who had spent her entire adult life radiating untouchable aristocratic superiority, was reduced to a hyperventilating, weeping mess. She searched his face for any sign of salvation, completely oblivious to the shocking dead silence of the room. There are no loopholes, Patricia, DeAndre stated, his voice completely devoid of pity. He looked down at her clawed hand on his arm with mild disgust. Blair holds a perfected security interest. The UCC filings are ironclad. The foreclosure is absolute. You have nothing left to hide. Patricia let out a harsh, desperate gasp. Her eyes scanned the grand room wildly before snapping back to DeAndre. Then buy it, she shrieked, the sheer panic in her voice rattling the crystal chandelier above. You can buy the debt. You and Camille have the money. You make millions, DeAndre. Camille is the chief of surgery at Mass General. Her salary alone can cover the immediate deficit. Write the check, DeAndre. Buy the deed back from Blair, and we'll pay you back with interest. We'll give you Richard's shares in the commercial park. Just don't let her take my home. DeAndre stared at her for a long moment. He slowly reached down and peeled Patricia's trembling fingers off his jacket, one by one, with deliberate and painful finality. He smoothed out the fabric of his sleeve. Then, a deep, resonant sound came from the back of his throat. DeAndre laughed. It wasn't an amused chuckle. It was a deep, booming laugh of absolute disbelief. The sound bounced off the high stone walls, cutting through the suffocating tension like a knife. Richard winced, his face darkening with a fresh wave of fury, while Trevor remained frozen on the floor, too broken to even react. You want a bailout? DeAndre said, his laughter giving way to a cold, lethal glare. You are standing in the middle of a foreclosed mansion. Your husband is drowning in secret gambling debt. Your son is facing federal fraud charges, and your first instinct is to ask me for a multi-million-dollar handout. DeAndre took a step forward, towering over Patricia. Let's talk about your concept of family shares, Patricia. Do you remember the country club dinner last December? The one where you proudly paraded me around your wealthy, insular social circle. You introduced me to your friends as Trevor's brilliant diversity hire, not his chief financial officer. Patricia opened her mouth, her face flushing bright red with embarrassment, but DeAndre didn't give her the chance to speak. Worch. And let's talk about my wife's surgeon's salary, DeAndre continued, his voice rising, controlling the room with the ruthless precision of a man executing a long overdue settlement. You want Camille to write a check to save your estate? The same Camille you waved over like hired help in the hallway of the summer charity gala. You snapped your fingers at my wife, a renowned neurosurgeon, and ordered her to clear empty champagne flutes. Because you assumed any black woman standing near a kitchen must be part of the catering staff. Patricia took a step back, stumbling as if she had been struck. DeAndre, please. It was a horrible misunderstanding. I apologized for that. You apologized because Richard realized I was the only person keeping Trevor from bankrupting this family 2 years ago. DeAndre barked, closing into her personal space. You didn't respect me, you didn't respect Camille, and you certainly never respected Blair. You spent years treating me like a walking ATM, expecting me to miraculously fix Trevor's gross incompetence and balance his fraudulent ledgers. And you spent years treating Blair like unpaid help just because she preferred reading to joining your shallow, toxic country club gossip. Richard stepped forward, his fists clenched, trying to salvage the last of his shattered authority. Watch your tone, DeAndre. You are still an employee of my son's company. I strongly suggest you remember who pays your salary. DeAndre turned his lethal gaze to Richard. Trevor doesn't pay my salary anymore, Richard. The company accounts were frozen solid at 8 a.m. Apex Capital acquired the corporate debt, which means my new boss is standing right over there by the fireplace. He gestured in my direction. And frankly, Blair pays me a hell of a lot better than your fraudulent son ever did. That sentence completely crushed the last bit of resistance left in Richard. The patriarch's shoulders sagged completely. He looked around the grand living room, taking in the antique furniture, the priceless art, and the soaring ceilings. He finally realized none of it belonged to him anymore. The illusion was broken. The empire had fallen. A light clicking of footsteps echoed from the marble foyer. Everyone turned to see Camille standing beneath the grand archway. She wore a stunning designer trench coat, her posture radiating absolute power and untouched elegance. She was here to pick up DeAndre for the holidays, and she had clearly heard enough to know exactly what was happening. She didn't offer a single word of sympathy. She simply looked at Patricia and delivered a calm, devastating smile of total victory. DeAndre adjusted his tie, turned his back on the ruined family, and left them in the wreckage of their own making. He walked to the archway and gently took Camille's hand. He looked back at Richard, Patricia, and Trevor one last time, his expression void of mercy. "We're leaving," DeAndre said, his voice echoing in the empty hall. "I wouldn't give you a single dime, Patricia. Good luck with your new landlord." DeAndre and Camille turned and walked out the front door. The heavy oak door shut behind them, with a definitive booming thud sealing the exit. They took the family's absolute last lifeline with them, leaving the group completely at my mercy. The heavy slam of the oak door echoed like a final verdict, sealing the family's fate. DeAndre and Camille were gone. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the occasional sharp, choked sob from Patricia as she slumped against the arm of a velvet chair. But my focus wasn't on the weeping matriarch or the defeated patriarch. My eyes were locked entirely on Monica. She stood rigid by the marble fireplace, her perfectly contoured face pale and twisted. The glass of champagne she had poured earlier to celebrate her supposed victory over me was shaking violently in her manicured hand. Her dark eyes darted from the red dossier on the coffee table to the county foreclosure notice, and finally to Trevor. Her ex-husband was still slumped against the base of the sofa, looking like a discarded, pathetic rag doll. He was hyperventilating, tugging frantically at his collar. Federal fraud charges, Monica whispered, the words escaping her lipsticked lips like a slow-acting poison. She took a deliberate step toward him, her high heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. You're facing federal fraud charges, Trevor? Trevor flinched, lifting his bloodshot, terrified eyes to meet hers. Monica, listen to me. It's just a misunderstanding with the loan covenants. I can restructure the debt. I know people. I just need a little time to make a few calls. Time? Monica screamed, her voice piercing enough to make even Richard wince, shattering the dead quiet of the room. You don't have time. You don't have a company. You don't have $50 million. You don't have a single cent to your name. She closed in on him, her chest heaving with pure rage. You begged me to come back, Monica shouted, pointing a finger directly at his face. You sat in my lawyer's office during the divorce restructuring and swore you were on the verge of a massive tech buyout. You waved those forged bank statements in front of me. You promised me wealth, Trevor. You promised me absolute security and untouchable luxury. You swore that if I brought our daughter back into your life, I would never have to worry about money again. And it was all a lie. You are a broke fraud. Monica's arm whipped forward. The crystal champagne glass flew through the air, smashing violently against the stone fireplace just inches from Trevor's head. Expensive shards of glass and sparkling wine rained down on the Persian rug. Trevor scrambled backward on his hands and knees, raising his arms to shield his face. Monica, please. I did it for you. I bought that penthouse to prove I could provide the life you deserved. You bought a penthouse with stolen money, she roared, stalking him like a predator. Do you know what this means? That deed is in my name, Trevor. The feds are going to audit every single asset in my possession. You dragged me into a federal embezzlement investigation. My reputation in this city is entirely ruined. My friends are going to read about this in the Financial Times. You humiliated me on a level I can't recover from. Patricia, momentarily distracted from her own financial ruin, looked up at Monica with pure, unfiltered venom. Don't you dare speak to my son like that, the older woman rasped, her voice harsh and grating. You're the one who bled him dry. You're the reason he felt pressured to take that loan. You parasitic gold digger. You drove him to this. Monica snapped her head around to face Patricia, letting out a sharp, mocking laugh entirely devoid of humor. Save it, Patricia! Your precious genius son is a criminal, and your husband gambled away your entire estate at offshore casinos. By next month, you'll be living out of a cheap motel. Don't look down your nose at me when you literally have nothing left. Richard took a heavy step forward, his face turning a dark purple. Get out of my house, you insolent woman! It isn't your house anymore, Richard. Monica fired back smoothly, lifting her chin with absolute arrogance. And I'm leaving right now. Monica turned her back on the entire family with a look of utter disgust. She smoothed down the front of her designer dress, taking a deep, shuddering breath to compose herself. Her transactional mind had already calculated the losses, and she was cutting ties immediately. She marched to the foyer table and snatched her designer handbag. Where are you going? Trevor shouted, pushing himself up onto his knees. Monica, you can't just leave me. We're a family. We can fight this together. We're legally divorced, Monica said coldly, not even turning around. Our reconciliation was strictly contingent on your financial portfolio, which currently consists of a federal indictment and a foreclosed property. I'm picking up Lily, and we're going to my sister's place in Connecticut. You'll be hearing from my lawyers regarding a highly restrictive custody arrangement. You will never see us again. She reached into her bag, rummaging through it aggressively. Letting out an impatient sigh, she turned back to Trevor, holding her open palm out. Give me the keys. Trevor blinked blankly at her. What? The keys to the Porsche! Monica snapped, her fingers clicking impatiently. My keys are upstairs in my other bag. and I am not spending another second in this depressing house. Toss me your spare set. I'm leaving. Trevor patted his pockets frantically, his hands shaking as he tried to comply with her final demand. But before he could find the heavy key fob, I took a calm step forward. Porch. I wouldn't waste your time looking, Trevor, I said, my voice smooth and conversational. Monica glared at me, her eyes flashing with impatient fury. Stay out of this, Blair. This has nothing to do with you. I'm taking my car and I'm leaving. I offered Monica a polite, razor-sharp smile. It isn't your car, Monica. Porch. As I mentioned earlier, that vehicle was purchased in full using misappropriated funds from the Apex Capital Bridge loan. The dealership financing was fraudulent, which means the title is completely void. The car legally belongs to the creditor. Monica's hand slowly dropped to her side. What are you talking about? Porch. I mean, my private equity firm wastes no time, I explained, folding my hands neatly in front of me. Yesterday, when the foreclosure proceedings were finalized, I simultaneously triggered the asset recovery protocol. I dispatched a specialized recovery team to impound all vehicles purchased by Trevor through his fraudulent shell companies. Their arrival was synchronized with my walk up the front steps. The horror of realization slowly dawned in Monica's eyes, widening them. She spun around violently and rushed to the massive front window, ripping back the heavy silk curtains to look out at the wide circular driveway. I didn't need to look outside to know what she saw. The immaculate gravel driveway is completely empty. The cherry-red Porsche was legally recovered and towed off the property exactly 10 minutes ago, I informed her, watching the absolute devastation radiate from her stiff back. I suggest you call a cab. Monica stared at me, her jaw hanging slack, her breathing rapid and shallow. For a woman whose entire existence was built on projecting superiority and flaunting stolen luxury, the reality of being stranded in the suburbs without a luxury vehicle was the final crushing blow. She let out a raw, guttural shriek of pure frustration, turned on her designer heels, and marched toward the heavy oak front door. She didn't look back at Trevor. She didn't look back at the grand staircase. The massive door slammed shut with a deafening boom that rattled the crystal fixtures, marking the final permanent end to the fantasy Trevor had constructed. Trevor remained slumped on the floor, his posture completely shattered. He slowly turned his head, his terrified gaze searching for his parents. He was looking for a rescue that was never going to come. Richard leaned heavily against the ornate wall paneling, staring blankly at the shattered champagne glass sparkling on the Persian rug. The intimidating, overbearing patriarch was gone, replaced by a hollow shell who had just realized his secret gambling debts had cost him his ancestral home. Patricia wept silently into her hands, her country club armor completely stripped away, finally understanding that her luxury winter vacations were permanently canceled, replaced by grueling bankruptcy hearings. They were ruined. They had nothing left to offer him. Slowly, Trevor turned his gaze back to me. His red, swollen eyes, shimmering with fresh tears, moved between my tailored suit and the red dossier sitting on the mahogany coffee table. He saw the undeniable reality of my position. I was no longer the quiet, submissive wife he could dismiss or ignore at dinner parties. I was the financial executioner holding the deed to his family's history. Inside his desperate, cornered mind, a new, sickening strategy began to take shape. He dragged his body across the floor. He literally crawled across the expensive antique rug until he was inches away from my shoes. He reached out with trembling hands, desperately clutching the hem of my trousers. Blair, please, he whimpered, tears streaming freely down his face, dripping onto his ruined cashmere sweater. Please look at me. You have to understand why this happened. You have to understand why I did it. I didn't move away immediately. I stood perfectly still, looking down at him, wanting to see exactly how low he was willing to grovel. I understand perfectly, I replied, my voice like a freezing undertone that turned the air between us to ice. You committed multiple counts of federal wire fraud just to buy the affection of a woman who just abandoned you to hitch a ride back to Connecticut. No, Trevor shouted, his voice cracking with a false theatrical agony. It was never about Monica. She was just a prop, Blair. She was a distraction because I was absolutely terrified of you. I stared at him, my expression hardening into a mask of pure, unadulterated disbelief. I saw what you were doing, he rambled, the words pouring out of his mouth in a frantic, panicked rhythm. Even when we were first married, I saw you analyzing complex commercial real estate portfolios late at night while I was still struggling to secure a simple seed round. I saw the confidential bank statements you hid in your home office. You were building something massive and brilliant right under my nose. You were quietly closing high-yield acquisitions while I was begging my father for cash just to keep my servers running. You never bragged. You never rubbed your wealth in my face. But I knew my own wife was infinitely more successful than I could ever dream of being. He gripped my pant leg tighter, looking up at me with wide, pleading eyes, trying to manipulate my empathy. Do you know what that does to a man? He sobbed, his voice echoing in the quiet room. My father raised me to believe I had to be the financial titan of this family. He taught me that I had to project absolute dominance at all times. But every time I looked at you, I felt like a complete fraud. I felt so small, Blair. I was so deeply insecure. I took that massive bridge loan because I was desperate to build an empire that could rival yours. I bought the luxury cars and the penthouse to force myself to feel as successful as you. I was completely castrated by your silent brilliance. I just wanted to be worthy of you. Richard turned his head slightly, a look of absolute disgust twisting his features as he watched his only son, the assumed heir to his dynasty, crawl on the floor, weaponizing his own inadequacy. We built our first apartment together, Trevor begged, his fingers digging into the fabric of my trousers, weaponizing the earliest, poorest days of our relationship. Remember that, Blair? Sitting on the floor eating cheap takeout, mapping out our future on a whiteboard. You were the only person in the world who believed in me before the venture capital firms even knew my name. Monica meant nothing to me. You were my real partner. You always have been. He leaned his body forward, attempting to rest his forehead against my knee. We can fix this, Blair. You own the corporate debt now. You hold the deed to the estate. We can restructure everything under your private equity firm. We can be a team again. I'll do whatever you want. I'll follow your command. You promised for better or for worse. And this is the absolute worst. I am begging you to save me. Please give me one more chance. Don't let the federal agents take me away. I looked down at the man I had once sworn to spend my life with. I searched my chest for a single ounce of pity, a lingering trace of affection, or even a brief memory of the love we used to share. There was nothing. My stomach turned with a deep sense of biological revulsion. He was attempting to rewrite history, twisting his naked narcissism, greed, and infidelity into a tragic tale of male insecurity. He wanted me to feel responsible for his crimes. He was a parasite, and now that his previous host had been bled dry, he was desperately trying to latch onto a new one. I kicked my leg back sharply, breaking his frantic grip, and took a step away from him as if avoiding a disease. You are truly pathetic, Trevor, I stated, my voice echoing with absolute, unfiltered disgust. I turned my back on his weeping form and reached into my heavy leather tote bag, bypassing the foreclosure documents and bank ledgers. You think a tearful, fabricated confession about your fragile ego is going to charm your way out of a federal indictment? You think this grand performance ends with you walking away free and clear? I pulled out the final, thick manila envelope, the heavy paper sealing his absolute destruction, and held it out toward him. The moment the manila envelope appeared in my hand, the pathetic, weeping disguise Trevor had been projecting vanished completely. The tears rimming his red eyes dried up with unnatural speed. His trembling lips flattened into a cold, vicious line. He realized, with absolute clarity, that the groveling had failed. I was no longer the naive, forgiving woman he had manipulated for over a decade. Orch. Trevor slowly pushed himself up from the Persian rug, his kneecaps making a slight clicking sound in the deafening quiet of the living room. He brushed imaginary dust off his ruined cashmere sweater, attempting to salvage what little remained of his pathetic dignity. He straightened his spine, and the familiar, arrogant sneer I had endured for 10 years returned to his face. Orch. Fine, Trevor spat, his voice dropping the panicked pitch and settling into a venomous, calculating growl. If you want to play it this way, Blair, we'll play it this way. He took a deliberate step toward me, jabbed a finger in my direction. You want to throw me out? You want to foreclose on my parents and show off your secret private equity firm? Go right ahead. Orch. But you forgot one massive, legally unavoidable detail. We are still legally married. Richard, who had been leaning against the wall in a state of catatonic shock, snapped his head up. The old man's eyes widened as the financial implications of his son's words hit him. A sickening gleam of hope flashed across the patriarch's face. Orch. That's right, Richard breathed, stepping forward to stand behind his son, suddenly finding his bravado again. This is an equitable distribution state. Marital assets are legally divided. Trevor let out a short, breathless laugh, his confidence inflating rapidly. Hear that, Blair? I don't care how many shell corporations you use to hide your acquisitions. Orch. I don't care how many offshore accounts Apex Capital operates through. You built that entire empire while wearing my wedding ring. Every single acquisition, every corporate buyout, every single dollar of profit you generated over the last decade happened during our marriage. Trevor crossed his arms over his chest, looking down at me with supreme entitlement. Orch. Legally, I am entitled to half of Apex Capital. My lawyers will drag you through endless discovery for the next 5 years. We'll freeze your corporate assets. We'll audit every single ledger. By the time I'm done with you in divorce court, I will own 50% of everything you built. You think you cornered me? You just handed me half of a multi-million-dollar empire on a silver platter. Orch. I didn't blink. I didn't take a step back. I simply stood there, letting his arrogant, greedy threats echo off the high stone walls of the massive living room. Patricia was actually smiling now, a vicious, triumphant smirk spreading across her tear-stained face. They truly believed they had found the ultimate loophole. Orch. They believed they were going to drain my hard-earned wealth to fund their fraudulent lifestyle and pay for their federal defense attorneys. I looked down at the heavy manila envelope in my hands. I slowly unwound the red string sealing the closure. Orch. You always did have a habit of overestimating your own intelligence, Trevor, I said, my voice remarkably quiet, cutting through his smug chuckle like a scalpel. And you always had a habit of underestimating mine. I reached into the envelope and pulled out a thick, bound legal document. The paper was pristine, the edges crisp, and the final page bore 2 very distinct notarized signatures. Orch. I tossed it casually onto the mahogany coffee table. It landed with a satisfying heavy thud right next to his federal foreclosure notice. Trevor frowned, his eyes locking onto the paperwork. What is that? I took a slow, deliberate step forward. It's a certified copy of our prenuptial agreement, I stated, watching the color instantly drain from his face. Trevor froze. Orch. His arms dropped limply to his sides. Richard's triumphant smile vanished completely, replaced by a look of sheer bewilderment. Do you remember the day we signed that, Trevor? I asked, locking my gaze onto his terrified eyes. Exactly 10 years ago. You had just secured your first $100,000 seed round for your startup. Orch. You were absolutely convinced you were going to be the next Silicon Valley billionaire. You were terrified that your quiet, unassuming bookkeeper fiancé might one day try to take a piece of your imagined tech fortune. I began to pace slowly around the coffee table, commanding the room with effortless authority. You brought me into that cold, glass-walled law firm downtown in Boston. Orch. You hired the most aggressive, ruthless asset protection attorney's money could buy. You sat across from me, slid that 50-page document across the table, and told me that if I didn't sign away all rights to your future earnings, the wedding was off. You wanted to make absolutely certain your precious legacy was permanently walled off from me. Trevor was hyperventilating again. Torch. He reached out a trembling hand and picked up the document, his eyes frantically scanning the dense legalese on the first page. I didn't need to read it. I had the specific clause perfectly memorized. Turn to page 32, Trevor, I commanded, my voice echoing with lethal precision. Section 4, Paragraph 2, outlining the division of commercial assets. Torch. Trevor frantically flipped through the heavy stack of paper, his breathing growing increasingly ragged as his eyes scanned the text. Let me save you the trouble of translating the legal jargon, I continued, stopping directly in front of him. Torch. Your expensive lawyers drafted an ironclad shield around independent commercial business ventures. The clause explicitly states that any corporate entity, private equity vehicle, or commercial asset founded, acquired, or managed by either individual during the course of the marriage shall remain the sole, separate, and exclusive property of that founding individual. It completely waives any right to equitable distribution of corporate growth or profits. The heavy document slipped from Trevor's trembling fingers, hitting the floor with a thud. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. The decision he made 10 years ago out of pure greed was now crushing him alive. Torch. You demanded a legal wall to keep me away from your money, I said, leaning in slightly, finally letting a slow, devastating smile spread across my face. But you were so blinded by your own arrogance that you didn't realize the wall worked both ways. Your prenuptial agreement explicitly protects individually founded businesses as separate property. Torch. You have absolutely zero legal claim to Apex Capital. You get nothing from my company. You don't even get a fraction of a % of my assets. I straightened up, looking down at the broken, pathetic man who had spent a decade treating me like a stepping stone. In your effort to protect your pennies, you shielded my billions. Torch. My words carried a sense of total finality, hanging heavy and suffocating in the air. Trevor knelt rigidly on the floor, his eyes fixed on the notarized pages of the prenuptial agreement that had just incinerated his last attempt at extortion. The very financial guillotine he had designed for me had just claimed his own head. He slumped back, his hands falling uselessly